It was a bright Tuesday morning in downtown Metro City when Captain Sarah Mitchell walked into Mason's department store. The sunlight streamed through the large glass windows, highlighting her casual weekend attire, a simple blue sweater and black jeans. At 42 years old, Sarah had served the Metro Police Department for 15 years, earning her captain's rank through dedication and exceptional service. Today wasn't about work, though. Her daughter Jessica was graduating from law school next week, and Sarah wanted to buy her something special. After spending nearly an hour looking through different sections, she found the perfect gift: a beautiful leather briefcase that would serve Jessica well in her new career as a lawyer. The price tag of $350 made her pause for a moment, but she knew her daughter deserved it. Standing at the counter, Sarah chatted warmly with the elderly cashier, Mrs. Thompson, about how proud she was of Jessica. She paid for the briefcase with her credit card and carefully placed the receipt in her purse. The store was getting busier now as the lunch hour approached, with more shoppers filling the aisles. As Sarah walked out of the store with her shopping bag, she didn't notice Officer James Reynolds watching her from his patrol car in the parking lot. Reynolds, a 34-year-old officer who had transferred to the Metro Police Department just 3 months ago, had been sitting there for the past hour, supposedly monitoring the shopping center for shoplifters. Reynolds' eyes narrowed as he watched Sarah walk toward her car. In his mind, something didn't look right. A black woman carrying an expensive shopping bag from Mason's. It didn't fit his prejudiced worldview. He didn't know, or care to know, that she was actually his superior officer. All he saw was what his biased mind wanted to see. Sarah was almost at her car when she heard quick footsteps behind her. Before she could turn around, a loud, commanding voice rang out across the parking lot. "Stop right there, police!" Several shoppers stopped to stare as Officer Reynolds approached Sarah with his hand resting on his holstered weapon. Sarah turned slowly, maintaining her composure despite the sudden confrontation. She dealt with situations like this before, though never as the subject of suspicion. "Is there a problem, officer?" Sarah asked calmly, already reaching for her department ID in her purse. "Keep your hands where I can see them," Reynolds barked, his voice carrying across the parking lot. "You match the description of a shoplifter we're looking for. Put the bag down slowly." Sarah's heart began to race, but her voice remained steady. "Officer, I'm Captain Sarah Mitchell from the 5th Precinct. I have my police ID right here in my purse, and I have the receipt for my purchase." Reynolds scoffed, taking a step closer. "Sure you are, and I'm the police commissioner. Put the bag down now, or I'll have to use force." By now, a small crowd had gathered. Several people had their phones out, recording the incident. A young woman in the crowd whispered to her friend, "This isn't right. She's just shopping like everyone else." Sarah slowly placed her shopping bag on the ground, her mind racing through protocol and procedure, the very same ones she taught at the academy. "Officer Reynolds," she said, reading his nameplate. "I'm going to reach for my ID very slowly." "On your knees," Reynolds shouted, now drawing his weapon. "Hands behind your head." The crowd gasped. More phones came out to record the scene. Inside the store, Mrs. Thompson, who had just finished serving Sarah, watched in horror through the window. Sarah's training kicked in. She knew that in this situation, the safest thing to do was comply and deal with the consequences later. Even as a captain, she understood that escalating the situation could lead to tragedy. Slowly, with dignified calm that came from years of experience, she got down on her knees. "This is a serious mistake, Officer Reynolds," she said clearly, loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "I am Captain Sarah Mitchell, badge number 5489, commanding officer of the 5th Precinct." Reynolds wasn't listening. His mind was already made up from the moment he saw her exit the store. He reached for his handcuffs, smugly confident in his actions, not knowing that this moment would soon change both their lives forever. The morning sun continued to shine brightly over the parking lot, illuminating a scene that would soon spark outrage across the city and become a turning point in the Metro Police Department's history. Officer Reynolds roughly handcuffed Captain Mitchell in the busy parking lot, making the metal bite into her wrists. The expensive leather briefcase she had bought for her daughter lay forgotten on the ground. The crowd of onlookers had grown larger, with many people shaking their heads in disbelief at the scene unfolding before them. "I'm telling you one last time," Sarah said firmly, maintaining her professional tone despite the humiliation. Check my ID in my purse. Call the precinct. I am Captain Sarah Mitchell. Reynolds laughed mockingly. Yeah, and I've heard every story in the book. You'll have plenty of time to make up more stories at the station. He started searching through her purse without permission, tossing items carelessly on the ground. Her wallet, phone, keys, and the store receipt fell onto the pavement. Mrs. Thompson, the elderly cashier who had just served Sarah, couldn't watch anymore. She hurried out of the store as fast as her legs could carry her. Officer, stop this at once. She called out, waving the store's copy of the receipt. This lady just bought that briefcase. I sold it to her myself. Ma'am, stay back. This is police business, Reynolds snapped, putting his hand up to stop her from coming closer. This is a known theft tactic, having someone pretend to be a witness. A young man in the crowd stepped forward, his phone still recording. This is wrong, man. She showed you her ID. She said she's a police captain. Why won't you just check? Reynolds turned to the crowd, his face red with anger. Everyone step back, or you'll all be arrested for interfering with police business. Just then, a police cruiser pulled into the parking lot with its lights flashing. Officer Maria Rodriguez and her partner Officer David Chen had been patrolling nearby when they heard the call about a disturbance at Mason's department store. As they got out of their car, both officers immediately recognized the woman in handcuffs. Oh my God, Rodriguez gasped. That's Captain Mitchell. She rushed forward, with Chen right behind her. Reynolds, what the hell are you doing? Chen called out, his face showing shock and dismay. Reynolds turned, his confident smirk fading slightly. Handling a shoplifting suspect. Stay out of this, it's my collar. Rodriguez stepped closer, her voice tight with controlled anger. That's our precinct captain you got in handcuffs, you idiot. Captain Mitchell, ma'am, are you all right? The color drained from Reynolds' face as he finally looked, really looked, at the ID he had tossed on the ground. There it was, the official Metro Police Department identification card with Captain Sarah Mitchell's photo, badge number, and rank clearly displayed. Reynolds stammered, his earlier confidence evaporating. Get these cuffs off me, now. Captain Mitchell's voice was calm but carried the full weight of her authority. The crowd watched as Rodriguez quickly moved to remove the handcuffs while Chen stepped between Reynolds and the captain. As she rubbed her sore wrists, Captain Mitchell straightened up to her full height. The watching crowd had grown even larger, and dozens of phones were still recording. She knew this incident would be all over social media within hours. Officer Reynolds, she said, her voice clear and controlled. You are immediately relieved of duty pending an investigation. Officers Rodriguez and Chen, please escort Officer Reynolds to Internal Affairs. Confiscate his badge and weapon. Reynolds started to protest, but Chen cut him off. You heard the captain. Hand them over. Mrs. Thompson had gathered Captain Mitchell's belongings from the ground and brought over the briefcase. I'm so sorry this happened, Captain, she said softly. I have security camera footage of your purchase if you need it. Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. Please have the store manager send that footage to my office. Captain Mitchell turned to address the crowd, her voice projecting authority and calm. I want to thank everyone who recorded this incident. Your concern for justice is commendable. I assure you, this matter will be thoroughly investigated. As Rodriguez and Chen led a shell-shocked Reynolds away, Captain Mitchell pulled out her phone. She had several calls to make to the police commissioner, to Internal Affairs, and to her daughter Jessica. This incident wouldn't be swept under the rug like so many others. She would make sure of that. The crowd began to disperse, but their phones were already busy uploading videos to social media. By nightfall, the whole city would know about the racist cop who had tried to arrest his own captain. The Metro Police Department's main station buzzed with unusual activity that afternoon. News of the incident at Mason's department store had spread like wildfire through the force. Officers gathered in small groups, talking in hushed voices as Reynolds was escorted through the building by Officers Rodriguez and Chen. At the front desk, Sergeant Mike Walsh, a 20-year veteran, watched in disbelief as they approached. He had known Captain Mitchell since she was a rookie and couldn't believe what he was hearing through the department grapevine. Take him to interview room 3, Sergeant Walsh ordered, his face stern as he looked at Reynolds. Internal Affairs is on their way. Reynolds, still trying to save face, spoke up. This is ridiculous. I was just doing my job. How was I supposed to know she was a captain? Shut up, Reynolds, Chen said firmly, steering him toward the interview room. You've done enough damage today. Meanwhile, in the commissioner's office on the top floor, Captain Mitchell sat across from Police Commissioner John Davidson, recounting the morning's events. The commissioner's face grew darker with each detail she shared. This is unacceptable, Commissioner Davidson said, shaking his head. But Sarah, I have to tell you something. After you called, I had my assistant pull Reynolds' personnel file. It's not good. Not good at all. He opened a thick folder on his desk. 6 complaints of racial profiling at his old precinct in the past year alone. 2 incidents of excessive force against minority suspects. All of them were either dismissed or buried. Captain Mitchell leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. How did he even get transferred here with a record like that? His former captain wrote him a glowing recommendation. Davidson replied, his voice filled with disgust. We're investigating that captain now too. Looks like they were old friends from the academy. Downstairs, the situation was getting more tense. News vans had started arriving outside the station after videos of the incident went viral on social media. Reporters were gathering in the lobby, demanding statements. In interview room 3, Reynolds sat alone, his arrogance finally cracking as reality set in. Through the window, you could see other officers walking past, some shaking their heads, others glaring at him with open disgust. The door opened, and 2 internal affairs investigators walked in, Lieutenant James Thompson and Detective Lisa Martinez. They had already watched multiple videos of the incident and reviewed Reynolds' file. Officer Reynolds, Lieutenant Thompson began, setting a recorder on the table. Let's talk about your actions today. But first, we'd like to discuss your history at your previous precinct. Reynolds shifted uncomfortably in his chair. What about it? My record was clean. Detective Martinez opened her laptop, turning it to show Reynolds a screen full of complaint files. Clean? That's not what we're seeing here. Let's start with the Johnson case from 6 months ago. Another false arrest with racial overtones. Those complaints were dismissed. Reynolds protested, his voice rising. They were buried? Thompson corrected him. Not anymore. We've spent the last 2 hours calling your former precinct. Officers there are finally speaking up, Reynolds. They're tired of covering for you. Just then, a knock on the door interrupted them. An officer handed Martinez a USB drive. The security footage from Mason's just arrived, and you need to see this. They played the footage on Martinez's laptop. It clearly showed Captain Mitchell making her purchase, chatting with the cashier, and leaving the store with her receipt. The footage then showed Reynolds watching her from his car, following her, and the entire confrontation. Care to explain this? Thompson asked, pausing the video on a clear shot of Reynolds drawing his weapon on an obviously calm and cooperative Captain Mitchell. Reynolds slumped in his chair, finally realizing the severity of his situation. I want my union representative, he mumbled. Oh, we've already called them, Martinez said. They've seen the videos too. Know what they said? He's on his own with this one. Outside the interview room, more officers had gathered. The shift change was happening, and incoming officers were being briefed about the situation. The story was growing bigger by the minute. Captain Mitchell left the commissioner's office and walked through the hallway, heads turning as she passed. Officers nodded respectfully, some approaching to express their support. She had always been a respected leader, but now she was becoming something more, a symbol of the change that was desperately needed in the department. As she reached her office, her phone buzzed with a message. The city mayor wanted to meet with her immediately. This incident was no longer just about one racist officer's actions. It was about to become a catalyst for major changes in the Metro Police Department. The next morning, the Internal Affairs Office was bustling with activity. Lieutenant Thompson and Detective Martinez had worked through the night, digging deeper into Officer Reynolds' past. What they found was disturbing. Look at this, Martinez said, pointing to her computer screen. In the past 3 years, Reynolds has stopped and searched 248 people. Over 80% of them were minorities. But his official reports claim it was only 30%. Thompson leaned over her shoulder, frowning. He's been falsifying his reports. Get me his dashcam footage from the past 6 months. As they dug deeper, more officers from Reynolds' old precinct started coming forward. Officer Kevin Peters, who had worked with Reynolds for 2 years, sat nervously in the interview room. "I should have said something sooner," Peters admitted, staring at his hands. Reynolds would always target minority drivers, especially in expensive cars. He'd call it his lottery, saying they must be doing something illegal to afford those vehicles. In another interview room, a young officer named Sarah Jones shared her story. "3 months ago, I saw Reynolds plant evidence in a black teenager's backpack. When I reported it to our supervisor, Captain Williams, he told me to forget what I saw if I wanted to keep my job." The investigation was growing bigger than anyone expected. Captain Williams, Reynolds' former supervisor and old academy friend, was now under investigation too. Internal affairs officers were sent to search his office, finding files hidden in a locked drawer. Meanwhile, Captain Mitchell sat in a meeting with the mayor, the police commissioner, and the city's legal team. The incident had made national news, and protests were forming outside police stations across the city. "The public needs to see that we're taking this seriously," Mayor Anderson said, looking worried. "This isn't just about one incident anymore. It's about systemic problems in our police force." Captain Mitchell spoke up. "I agree, but let's not forget, there are good officers out there too." Officers Rodriguez and Chen responded immediately when they recognized me. Mrs. Thompson from the store stood up for what was right. "We need to support the good while removing the bad." Back in the Internal Affairs office, more evidence was piling up. Detective Martinez discovered old text messages between Reynolds and other officers, filled with racist jokes and comments. They found body camera footage that had supposedly been lost, showing Reynolds harassing minority citizens. "Look at this case from last year," Thompson said, holding up a file. Reynolds arrested a black female doctor for stealing her own car. The complaint was buried, just like all the others. The investigation team set up a hotline for citizens to report past incidents involving Reynolds. Within hours, the phones were ringing nonstop. Each call revealed a new story of harassment, discrimination, or abuse of power. One caller, Maria Hernandez, came to the station to give her statement. "Last summer, Officer Reynolds gave me a ticket for suspicious behavior while I was walking to my cleaning job in the rich part of town. He said people like me didn't belong in that neighborhood." By late afternoon, news cameras surrounded the police station. Reporter Jackie Chen from Channel 5 News stood outside, delivering a live update. Sources inside the department tell us that this investigation has uncovered years of discriminatory behavior by Officer Reynolds, possibly protected by higher-ranking officers. The FBI has now been called in to assist with the investigation. Inside his holding cell, Reynolds was beginning to crack. His fellow officers refused to speak to him. His union representative had told him there was too much evidence to fight. His former captain wasn't answering his calls. Captain Mitchell received another visit from Internal Affairs. "Captain," Martinez said, "we found something else. Reynolds has been posting on racist websites for years, using his work computer. He even bragged about targeting minorities during his shifts." The commissioner called an emergency meeting with all precinct captains. "This ends now," he announced. "We're implementing new oversight measures. Body cameras will be reviewed weekly. Traffic stop data will be audited monthly. Any officer with a pattern of discriminatory behavior will be investigated immediately." As the day drew to a close, Captain Mitchell stood at her office window, watching the protesters below. Their signs demanded change, accountability, and justice. Thanks to Reynolds' mistake in targeting her, they might finally get it. Sometimes, she thought, karma works in mysterious ways. The investigation was far from over, but one thing was clear: the Metro Police Department would never be the same again. 1 week after the incident at Mason's department store, the truth about Officer Reynolds continued to spill out like a broken dam. The security footage from the store had gone viral, reaching over 10 million views online. But this was just the beginning. Mary Johnson, the store's security manager, arrived at the police station carrying a large envelope. "I have all the camera angles from that day," she told Detective Martinez. "But there's something else you need to see." They watched the additional footage in the investigation room. It showed Reynolds sitting in his patrol car for nearly 2 hours before Captain Mitchell arrived, ignoring several white shoppers carrying expensive items. He had clearly been waiting to target someone based on race. "This proves it wasn't random," Lieutenant Thompson said, pausing the video. "He was hunting for a specific type of person to harass." At that moment, Officer Rodriguez knocked on the door with more evidence. She had been checking Reynolds' patrol car computer history. "You won't believe what I found," she said, placing a thick stack of papers on the table. "He's been searching the department database for successful minority business owners and their home addresses." The investigators spread out the papers. Reynolds had been creating profiles of wealthy minorities in the area, noting their cars, routines, and when they were most likely to be alone. It wasn't just racism, it was calculated harassment. Meanwhile, in another part of the station, 3 more officers from Reynolds' old precinct came forward to give statements. Officer Tom Wilson, a veteran of 15 years, looked ashamed as he spoke. "We all knew what Reynolds was doing," Wilson admitted. "He'd brag about it in the break room. Said he was keeping them in their place. Captain Williams would just laugh it off, call it old-school policing." The FBI agents who had joined the investigation set up a command center in a conference room. Special Agent Lisa Chang pointed to a wall covered with photos and documents. "Look at this pattern," she said. "Reynolds didn't work alone. There's a whole network of officers who helped cover up complaints." They discovered a secret messaging group where Reynolds and other racist officers shared information about minority citizens to target. The messages were filled with hate speech and plans to harass innocent people. Captain Mitchell sat in her office, reviewing the growing evidence. Her phone rang. It was Mrs. Thompson, the elderly cashier from Mason's. "Captain," Mrs. Thompson said, "I remembered something important. That wasn't the first time I saw Officer Reynolds watching our store. He used to park there every Tuesday, always when our African-American customers would come to shop during lunch break." The store's monthly security footage confirmed Mrs. Thompson's story. Reynolds had been stalking the store for months, targeting specific shoppers based on their race. By afternoon, more victims of Reynolds' harassment began arriving at the station. Michael Brown, a successful black restaurant owner, shared his story with the investigators. "Reynolds pulled me over 6 times in 1 month," Brown said. "Each time, he'd say my Mercedes looked too expensive for someone like me. He even followed me home once, telling my neighbors to watch out for suspicious activity." In the evidence room, Detective Martinez made another discovery. She found a personal notebook in Reynolds' locker, filled with racist writings and a disturbing list of suspicious people, all successful minorities in the community. The media caught wind of these new developments. Reporter Jackie Chen was back outside the station. Sources say the investigation has uncovered evidence of an organized harassment campaign targeting minority citizens. Several high-ranking officers may have been involved in covering up these activities. Commissioner Davidson called Captain Mitchell to his office. On his desk lay Reynolds' complete uncensored file, not the cleaned-up version they'd seen before. "Sarah," he said gravely, "this goes deeper than we thought. Reynolds had protection from the top. Some of our senior officers were helping him hide evidence, destroy complaints, and intimidate victims." Captain Mitchell picked up the file, her hand steady but her heart racing. "How many other officers are involved?" "We've identified 12 so far," the commissioner replied, "including 2 captains and a deputy chief." As the sun set on another long day of investigation, the full truth was finally coming to light. Reynolds wasn't just one bad officer. He was part of a larger problem that had infected the department for years. Captain Mitchell stood at her window again, watching the evening news vans gather outside. Tomorrow, they would begin the hard work of cleaning house and rebuilding trust. The truth was out, and there was no going back. 2 weeks after the incident, the large conference room at police headquarters was packed for Officer Reynolds' disciplinary hearing. The room buzzed with tension as officers, city officials, and media representatives filled every seat. Captain Mitchell sat in the front row, her posture straight and professional. Next to her sat Mrs. Thompson from Mason's department store and several other citizens who had come forward as victims of Reynolds' harassment. The disciplinary board consisted of 5 senior officers from different precincts, 2 civilian oversight committee members, and a representative from the Justice Department. They sat behind a long table, their faces serious as they reviewed the mountain of evidence before them. Reynolds sat alone at a small table, looking much smaller without his uniform and badge. His police union lawyer had quit the case yesterday after seeing the full evidence file. Now, he had to defend himself. Officer James Reynolds, the board chairman began, you face multiple charges of racial discrimination, abuse of power, falsifying police reports, and criminal harassment. How do you plead? Reynolds cleared his throat, his voice shaky. I was just doing my job, following my training. Your training? Captain Mitchell stood up, her voice clear and strong. I run the training academy, Officer Reynolds. We never trained officers to target citizens based on race. We never taught harassment or discrimination. The board began presenting evidence. Videos played on large screens showing Reynolds' pattern of targeting minorities. His secret notebook appeared on the screen, full of racist comments and lists of people to harass. Text messages between Reynolds and other corrupt officers flashed by, revealing years of coordinated discrimination. Mrs. Thompson stepped forward to testify. I watched him sit in that parking lot for months, targeting black and brown customers. When he tried to arrest Captain Mitchell, I knew I had to speak up. Enough was enough. Michael Brown, the restaurant owner, shared his story of repeated harassment. His hands shook as he described how Reynolds had tried to destroy his business by spreading false rumors about drug dealing. Then came the testimony from Reynolds' fellow officers. Officer Wilson described the toxic culture at their old precinct. Reynolds and Captain Williams would laugh about their hunting trips. That's what they called targeting minority neighborhoods. As the evidence mounted, Reynolds seemed to shrink in his chair. His face turned pale when the FBI agent presented records of the secret messaging group where officers had coordinated their discriminatory actions. Mr. Reynolds, the civilian oversight member spoke, your actions have destroyed public trust, violated civil rights, and brought shame to this department. Do you have anything to say in your defense? Reynolds stood up slowly, sweat visible on his forehead. I was wrong. I got caught up in a system that encouraged this behavior. But I'm not the only one. No, you're not. The Justice Department representative cut in. That's why this investigation has expanded. Captain Williams and 11 other officers will face their own hearings next week. But today, we're focused on you. The board took only 30 minutes to reach their decision. The chairman's voice was firm as he read it. James Reynolds, you are immediately terminated from the Metro Police Department. Your pension is revoked. All cases you handled will be reviewed. Additionally, we are recommending criminal charges for civil rights violations. Reynolds collapsed in his chair as the chairman continued. Furthermore, we are forwarding evidence of your crimes to every police department in the country. You will never work in law enforcement again. Captain Mitchell watched as 2 officers escorted Reynolds out. Outside, protesters cheered at the news of his termination. News helicopters circled the building, broadcasting the scene live across the country. Commissioner Davidson approached Captain Mitchell. This is just the beginning, he said. We're implementing your recommended reforms immediately. Body cameras must stay on. Regular bias training is mandatory. Civilian oversight for all complaints. Captain Mitchell nodded, feeling both tired and hopeful. The hard work starts now. Rebuilding trust won't be easy. As Reynolds was led to a police car, now as a suspect rather than an officer, reporters shouted questions. But he kept his head down, finally understanding the consequences of his actions. Inside, the board prepared for their next cases. 12 more hearings were scheduled, reaching all the way up to deputy chief. The old system was crumbling, making way for something new and better. Captain Mitchell gathered her things, preparing to leave. Her phone buzzed, a text from her daughter Jessica. Mom, you've started something important. Real change is happening. And she was right. This wasn't just about one officer's punishment anymore. It was about transforming an entire system, one consequence at a time. 1 month after Reynolds' termination, the changes in the Metro Police Department were becoming visible. The main conference room had been converted into a temporary office for the reform team, its walls covered with new policies and training schedules. Captain Mitchell walked through the station, noticing the difference in atmosphere. Officers who had once stayed silent about misconduct were now speaking up. The blue wall of silence was crumbling, replaced by a culture of accountability. Captain, Officer Rodriguez called out, hurrying over with a tablet. The first round of new body camera reviews is complete. Look at these statistics. The numbers showed a significant drop in complaints against officers since the new oversight system began. Meanwhile, in the courthouse downtown, Reynolds faced his criminal trial. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Security footage, victim testimonies, his own racist writings, and the secret messaging group logs filled dozens of boxes in the prosecutor's office. District Attorney Maria Santos addressed the crowded courtroom. "Your Honor, we have proof of over 50 instances where Mr. Reynolds violated citizens' civil rights. He didn't just disgrace his badge, he committed serious crimes." Reynolds sat at the defense table, wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of his former blue uniform. His face had grown pale and thin during his time in jail. Behind him, many of his victims sat in the gallery, watching justice unfold. The judge, an older woman named Justice Peterson, reviewed the evidence carefully. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, "your actions have caused deep harm to this community. You used your position of authority to terrorize innocent citizens." The sentence came down hard: 5 years in federal prison for civil rights violations, plus 3 years for official misconduct. Reynolds would also have to pay damages to his victims and perform community service after his release. Back at the police station, more changes were happening. The new Civilian Oversight Committee held its first official meeting. Community members, including Mrs. Thompson and Michael Brown, now had real power to review police actions and recommend changes. Commissioner Davidson stood at the podium in the press room, making another important announcement. "Today, we're implementing Captain Mitchell's comprehensive reform plan. Every officer will receive new training. Every complaint will be investigated. No exceptions." The reforms included mandatory body cameras that couldn't be turned off during shifts, weekly review of all police interactions with citizens, new diversity training led by community members, anonymous reporting system for officers to report misconduct, regular meetings between police and community leaders, independent investigations of all discrimination complaints. In her office, Captain Mitchell received an unexpected visit from Officer Wilson, who had testified against Reynolds. "Captain," he said, looking nervous, "more officers from other precincts want to come forward. They're tired of the old way of doing things." The ripple effect spread beyond the city. Police departments across the country began calling, asking about the Mitchell reforms, as they were now being called. News programs invited her to speak about changing police culture. Mrs. Thompson organized a community meeting at Mason's department store, bringing together shop owners, police officers, and local residents. The store's break room was packed as people shared their experiences and hopes for the future. "We're not against the police," Mrs. Thompson explained to the group. "We're against abuse of power. Thanks to Captain Mitchell, we're finally seeing real change." Even Reynolds' former victims were part of the healing process. Michael Brown, the restaurant owner, joined the Police Academy's Community Advisory Board. His experiences would help train new officers about the impact of biased policing. Late one evening, Captain Mitchell sat with her daughter Jessica, now a newly graduated lawyer, reviewing the department's new policies. "Mom," Jessica said proudly, "you turned a terrible experience into something positive. You're changing the whole system." The local news that night showed clips from the day's events: Reynolds being led to prison, new officers taking their oath under the reformed guidelines, and community members working alongside police in training sessions. Commissioner Davidson visited Captain Mitchell's office one last time that day. "The mayor called," he said, smiling. "She wants to create a new position, Chief of Police Reform and Community Relations. She wants you to take it." Captain Mitchell looked at the framed photo on her wall, showing her graduation from the police academy 20 years ago. She had joined the force to make a difference. Now, thanks to karma working in mysterious ways, she had an even bigger chance to create change. As she left the station that evening, she saw new posters in the hallway announcing next week's community policing training. The old guard was gone, and a new era of accountable, respectful law enforcement was beginning. 6 months after the incident that shook the Metro Police Department, Chief Sarah Mitchell stood at the podium in City Hall. Her new title still felt strange, but her mission was clearer than ever. The large room was packed with officers, community members, and media representatives. "Today marks 6 months since we began our reform journey," she began, looking at the diverse crowd before her. The numbers tell a powerful story. Behind her, a large screen displayed the latest statistics. Civilian complaints down by 70%. Community trust ratings up by 85%. Officer satisfaction increased by 60%. Zero incidents of racial profiling in the past quarter. In the front row, Mrs. Thompson smiled proudly. The elderly cashier had become a symbol of civilian courage, recently receiving a City Hero Award for standing up against injustice. Next to her sat Michael Brown, now heading the department's Community Relations Board. Meanwhile, in a federal prison 200 miles away, James Reynolds sat in his cell reading a newspaper article about the changes he had unintentionally sparked. His former boss, Captain Williams, occupied a cell 3 doors down, both men serving time for their crimes against the community. Back at City Hall, Chief Mitchell continued her presentation. Our department has become a national model for police reform. Last week, representatives from 20 different cities visited to learn about our new programs. Officer Rodriguez, recently promoted to sergeant, stood up to share the success of her new training program. Our officers now spend 2 weeks living with families in different communities, she explained. It helps them understand the people they serve. The changes were visible everywhere in the department. Every patrol car now had a sign with a QR code for citizen feedback. Weekly community meetings were held in each precinct. Body camera footage was randomly reviewed by civilian committees. Officers received regular mental health support and bias awareness training. Promotion criteria now included community service hours. Chief Mitchell's daughter Jessica, now working as a civil rights attorney, watched her mother from the audience. 6 months ago, she had been buying a graduation gift. Now she was helping draft new police accountability laws. But our biggest achievement, Chief Mitchell continued, is the change in culture. Officers are proud to be part of a department that serves everyone equally. To demonstrate this, Officer Chen stepped forward with his weekly community engagement report. Last month, our officers helped organize 12 neighborhood events, from basketball games to cooking classes. We're not just policing the community, we're part of it. The mayor stood up to share some exciting news. The Mitchell model of police reform is being adopted by departments across the country. Next month, Chief Mitchell will speak at a national conference on law enforcement reform. In the back of the room, some of Reynolds' former victims watched with tears in their eyes. The system that had once ignored their complaints was now actively working to prevent similar abuses. Mrs. Thompson took the podium to share her perspective. 6 months ago, I saw something wrong and spoke up. Today, I see officers and citizens working together. That's what real change looks like. The local news teams captured the moment as Chief Mitchell unveiled the department's new motto: serve, protect, respect. The old badges have been replaced with new ones carrying this promise to the community. After the presentation, Chief Mitchell visited the police academy where new recruits were training. The classroom walls displayed pictures of past mistakes, including Reynolds' arrest of her, used as teaching tools for what not to do. Your generation of officers, she told the recruits, will be different. You'll be guardians, not warriors. Community partners, not just law enforcers. As the day ended, Chief Mitchell stood in her old parking spot at Mason's department store, now marked with a small plaque, where change began. The store had become a symbol of community policing, hosting monthly meetings between officers and residents. Her phone buzzed with a message from the FBI. Reynolds' secret network of corrupt officers had been completely dismantled, with the last conspirator pleading guilty that morning. Driving home, she passed patrol cars, stopping to chat with children, officers walking their beats and greeting residents by name, and community centers where police and citizens worked together on local projects. The final karma had played out. Reynolds' attempt to humiliate one black woman had led to a complete transformation of policing in their city. His racism and abuse had backfired, creating positive change he never intended. As the sun set on another day of progress, Chief Mitchell smiled, knowing that sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best changes. The department's dark past had given way to a brighter future, proving that justice, though sometimes slow, was always worth fighting for.